Good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming. We have no conflicts of interest to disclose, so we'll just move right along. We wanted to talk today about how we can strengthen student athletes' leadership skills in the weight room. So as you said, my name is Whitney Moore. I'm at Wayne State University, but before I went back to get my PhD, I was a strength coach. I had a strength conditioning company working with youth, primarily 8 to 18-year-olds, but also some college athletes and some parents and adults in small group training sessions. And in working with a lot of coaches and the athletes, I got curious about what is it that we can do as coaches to maximize the engagement of our kids and whoever it is that we're working with to want to keep being active and staying engaged in our training sessions to give us the best effort. Because if we're getting the most effort out of them, we're going to be able to help get them the most benefits and improvements possible. So that's what sent me back to get my PhD and now eventually up here in front of you.
Awesome. And my name is Dale Smith. I am one of her doctoral students at Wayne State University, but prior to going back to getting my PhD, I was a strength coach in the private sector, again, working with youth up until college and professional athletes, and had this drive to want to find out what we could do as coaches to better enhance and help our athletes to the best of our abilities. Yeah. So why leadership development of athletes in the weight room, Dr. Moore?
Such a good question, Val. It's actually a question, or a similar question I have gotten a lot over the last 3 to 5 years as I started becoming more involved in the sport and exercise psych side of things with the SIG, and people started coming up to me wanting to know, well, how can I get my athletes to take responsibility of their training, to take ownership in training programs, and feel like they should be the ones taking some of the leadership on as well. And so we wanted to focus on how we can, as coaches, increase the leadership our athletes are taking in the weight room so that they do have all those benefits of they feel like they're taking ownership, it's their training, and they're being able to have an impact not just on themselves, but on their whole team, and they're responsible for that type of improvement.
Perfect. So today, just to give you guys a little bit of an overview of what we're going to look at and what we hope for you guys to get out of this session is, one, we hope that you guys will learn some relationships and strategies used by expert strength and conditioning coaches to help increase your athletes' motivation. Additionally, we hope that you guys can use some of this research-based, weight room-tested athlete leadership development strategies that can help you with your training and your existing training programs. And then lastly, we also hope that leadership development strategies will include some daily and some rotational things that you guys can incorporate those where you see best fit within your strength conditioning program.
And so just to note, since this is a Bridge the Gap series, this afternoon in our 1 o'clock session, we're going to dive in even more into that third learning objective. We're going to talk about it today in this morning session, but this afternoon, that's going to be the primary focus, is how do we actually implement all of this in real life. So the first thing, since we're talking about leadership, is to make sure we're all on the same page about what we mean by leadership. So usually when we think of leaders, as coaches, we're the leaders, right? And we usually have a few captains on the team. They're the leaders also. But we can also have informal leaders. And actually, anyone who's taking on any type of a leadership role on a team is an informal leader. And what we see when we have more and more informal leaders, we see more and more of these positive outcomes. Okay, so we see that the athletes are reporting they have increased satisfaction on the team, they have more team cohesion, they understand their role on the team, and they also feel like they have more clarity in what they're going to be doing and how to work on meeting those team norms. They also have individual benefits. So it's not just at the team level that we see improvement with lots of informal leaders. We also see that their individual competence and their performance and satisfaction all also increases. So then typically the next question that gets asked is, great, so how many should I have? And the answer we get consistently is the more the merrier. So the more informal leaders we have, the better it is for our team and all of these outcomes we're looking for. One of the things that athletes report when they've been asked how many leaders do you want on the team or how many leaders do you think you should have on this team as formal and informal leaders, informally they're saying at least 2/3 of their teammates should be leaders. So if you take that 2/3 of the athletes on a team are leaders and then you add in the formal leaders as captains, you're looking usually at least 80% of the athletes on a squad are taking on some type of leadership. And that's their preference as a minimum. So we want to really try to get everybody engaged at some level as being a leader on our teams.
Perfect. So now in just a continuation of that, what some of the literature has shown us, and this is a qualitative study looking at how athletes perceived both formal or informal or both of them as influencing different areas of the team. What I want to highlight to you is that all of the formal and informal leaders are all of the black boxes, right? So we've got a lot of say with athletes perceiving that informal leaders are just as influential as some of the formal leaders. I want to focus our attention, though, on this leadership behavior part, since that is what we're going to focus on today. So individuals' leadership behaviors can come from something called transformational leadership, which we will get into in the next few slides. But they are incorporated in with idolized influence, inspirational motivation, and individualized consideration. So our informal leaders are helping influence these different areas within our team. In addition to that, we also have transactional leadership that looks at social support and democratic behavior, and the only one out of those that are looking more in the formal region are the training and instruction. So overall, we are seeing a lot of informal leaders influence our athletes in a positive format. Peer leaders can also come in the form of social leadership. For example, trusting your teammates. So informal leaders are leading this role on trusting one another, trusting their teammates, and the peers are looking for other social support in this informal or formal role. Task leadership, which is going to help our teammates focus on some of the goals that they have. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to come from the top down, can also come from the peers in an informal concept. And peers are regularly providing training instruction, positive feedback, and social support. We also want to highlight that some of the research says that positive feedback and social support are actually coming more from informal leaders than they are from the formal leaders.
And so originally it was thought that leadership was something you're either born with or you weren't, right? You either are a leader or you're not, and so you're never going to be taking on those leadership roles. But what we know now is that leadership can be learned. We can learn those behaviors, but that means just like everything else that we are needing to learn, we have to have someone intentionally help us learn those, right? So when we're training our athletes, we have to teach them how to do the exercises. We need to teach them how to be leaders. And some of the things that qualify and part of being an informal leader are some of the things that we've listed on here, like giving technical instruction, giving positive or motivational feedback, acting as a role model. So those athletes you have who give a lot of effort and are your real workhorses, they're role modeling that type of effort you want to see during training sessions. So that's how they're being an informal leader. And we also trying to keep teammates motivated or on task. Anybody ever had their athletes go off task slightly during a training session? If we're able to get the athletes to get on each other to stay on track, or this is important, that makes it easier for us too, because they're being able to act like mini assistant coaches for us a little bit, right? If you've got 40 or 50 athletes especially, or even if you have 10 and they're all 12-year-old boys trying to run everywhere, if they are engaged with you and they're acting as mini assistants for you, that helps you be able to help those who need the most help first and work through everybody, but they're all getting to have this type of feedback. And so there's a lot of different types of leadership theories out there and styles, and you may have read books or articles on some of these different theories, so we just wanted to highlight one. There's a lot of really good options out there. Some are a little bit more on the positive end, some are a little less on the positive end. Those that are on the positive end include things like transformational, servant leadership, and facilitative leadership, and these are just a handful of the examples. But something they typically have in common is that no matter what they're doing specifically as highlighting as their behaviors, they're interacting with their followers, with their athletes, to make sure that their athletes understand why they're doing what they're doing. They're explaining what they're doing and not just telling them, we want you to do this because I told you to, which is primarily what we see more on these less positive approaches where it's directive, controlling, or autocratic. I'm in charge, don't ask me questions, I'm going to tell you what to do, you do it, you're going to be better, okay? And then we have some that are sort of neutral. There are these transactional ones. It's not a positive or a less positive approach, it's just more giving information and looking to see how they're performing and giving them feedback again on that, okay? So what we're gonna do is focus more on the positive approaches, and we're gonna focus primarily on transformational as our example, okay? But there's a lot of others out there that are just as good. So what we see when we have these more positive leadership approaches are a lot of the things we wanna see, and the things that a lot of coaches were asking, how can I increase this more? Things like increasing our athletes' self-belief in themselves, their self-confidence. as well as their motivation to show up to training. So usually when they're coming to us because their sport coach told them that they needed to come and train with us, or somebody else told them they should come train with us. Not all of them are coming because they just think that training is the funnest thing ever. So if we can get them to actually want to come to train and they enjoy the training sessions, like we all enjoy the training sessions, then we've got more buy-in from them, right? And they're going to work harder for us. We also see that when we're using these more positive approaches, they actually have more pro-social behaviors towards each other. And so they're actually helping each other perform better. We're seeing that there's less antisocial behaviors like bullying that are occurring as well. And we also see less tension, less pressure, less anxiety among our athletes. Plus all this adds up to them performing better. Okay, when we see some of those more controlling autocratic approaches that are less positive, we see basically an almost opposite relationship where we see that they're having increased anxiety and tension. They have actually increased extrinsic motivation. So they showed up because they were supposed to become better at their sport. That was their external reason for coming, and now they're coming just because I have to or I should because of my coach. So they're losing that any potential intrinsic motivation they had to start with. They're becoming more rivalrous and comparative to their peers versus working cooperatively to all improve. They're competing more against each other. And they actually disengage morally and become more antisocial towards each other and increase the bullying that can occur with their own teammates, not just with their opponents. And then the things we'd like to see increase, like self-confidence and motivation, are the things that are actually decreasing. So we want to focus on those positive outcomes and how we can promote those with all of our athletes.
Perfect. So what is transformational leadership, and how do we break this down so that we can use it inside the weight room? I just want to highlight first that we decided to use the 4 original pillars that were involved with transformational leadership. However, for those of you that have used this before or done some research on it, or after this talk, go get fired up about transformational leadership. There are some of these that can be up to 7, where some of the researchers have parsed out a few of these pillars, but we're gonna focus on the 4 original pillars, starting with inspirational motivation. So when we see this with our athletes, right, we're seeing our athletes give positive feedback to one another, we're seeing them engage in conversation in a positive manner, and we're seeing them encourage the athletes as they're doing our training sessions. Next, individualized consideration. This is going to be more in the form of informal and peer mentorship or leadership. This can come from our senior athletes, right? Mentoring and peering our younger athletes. It can be someone who's in one of those formal roles. It could also just be you've got the formal role of you're the most seasoned freshman athlete that comes in, right? And you're giving everybody else some help. The next one down is individualized consideration. So this is when we see a little bit more of the role modeling, okay? Confidence, right? Guidance and whatnot in our athletes. So this is going to be more in the form of we see our athletes setting an example, right, for the rest of the athletes that are on that team and someone that someone's looking up to. And then last but not least, intellectual simulation. And this is where we're going to have athletes like knowing what the purpose is behind what we're doing in the weight room and how it translates to on-field performance. So expert strength and conditioning coaches can also exhibit these leadership behaviors. Now we're just going to walk through what some of the research shows when it comes to expert coaches and how we also need to be leaders. Starting with the ASU coaching observational instrument. I just want to point out, you guys, that there are a ton of different instruments that are out there for you to utilize. The reason that we chose this is because it was solely based for strength and conditioning coaches. So as you guys can see, there are a lot of different behaviors on here, and this actually goes into the next slide, which we'll go on in a second, but coaching is not a one-way street, right? There are a lot of different behaviors and things that we as coaches have to deal with, right? It's a fine art and it's learned over time. But you guys can use this as a tool with you and your staff, right? This is a frequency tool, so you would have this piece of paper out and you would check off how many times you saw your staff, or if a researcher or team was in there, how many times they were doing each one of these attributes. For example, did they give an instruction in the beginning? It's all right.
I'm so excited. Sorry, guys.
Did we see a preseason or beginning instruction, right? And then after the lift was over, did we see the coach bring the team together and talk about how that lift went? Next, we want to highlight that although we see all of these things on here, there is a little bit of a ratio on what we want to see. So there are some things that we might want to see a little bit more of and some things that we would like to see less of. So for example, praise and scolding are both on there. In the literature, when it comes to expert coaches and how they're evaluated, we would like to see a minimum of 5 positive reinforcements to every 1 negative reinforcement. And that's kind of a minimum. And it's been shown that the coaches have been able to do this. So just keep that in mind as you're going through as well, that some of these we like to see a little bit higher or lower than others.
And we've included the reference on here so that you guys can take a look at this article and be able to see some of those bigger details of how else you can use this. It's not just as a frequency. There's a lot of other things you can utilize once you have those frequency counts.
Awesome. So how do coaches act as transformational leaders? And hopefully some of you guys, as we go through this, will be able to nod your head and say, like, I'm doing a great job. But coaches exhibit characteristics like imposing ideals on their athletes, setting up goals that are going to challenge them. They're showing, they're being a role model, right? So we're being a role model for our athletes. And lastly, that we are showing concern and we are genuinely caring about our athletes. In addition to that, transformational, it's been a rough morning already. Transformational leaders are also going to show that to their athletes that they want to inspire them. And that being said, we see things like creating a vision for them, right? What's the plan? You're not just coming in every day and doing something with them. You have an overall goal of where you see them going, and you've talked to them about this. That we're setting challenging goals, right? Every day when we walk into the weight room, it's something new, and how are we going to push ourselves a little bit further that day? And then lastly, we're intellectually stimulating them. So we are connecting some of those pieces, maybe to real world examples or to how what we do in the weight room is going to relate to on-field performance.
And so what we wanted to do next was just take some of the research that's been done with expert strength and conditioning coaches, doing observations with them as well as interviews to understand the behaviors and the strategies that they use as expert strength and conditioning coaches, and connect those to the 4 pillars of transformational leadership. So we're going to walk through each one of those as our next step here. So with inspirational motivation, some of the things that expert coaches are seen to do or that they report doing a lot is working on knowing their athletes so that they know how to motivate each individual athlete. What does one athlete need that's going to motivate them compared to somebody else? They may need a different trigger or a different term. I had an athlete that, they would do form slightly incorrect. I'd give them a correction. They would then be doing a better version of the form, and I would tell them that they were doing better. I thought that was good, positive feedback to give them, right? Until the athlete came to me and said, I hate it when you say that, because that means it's not perfect. So I had to learn with her, better was never a word that was acceptable for me to use to motivate her, right? So we learn what our athletes need and what they need to hear to know, is this something I'm still trying to improve? Or if you got this and we want to keep doing more and more of what you're already doing, you've nailed the form. Also knowing when to focus our training on maintenance, recovery, versus now is the time I can push them because I've talked to them and I know they've had enough recovery that we can go into the next phase. As well as knowing what's going on outside of training. We've had a bigger increase in push on talking about knowing what's going on outside of training and how that influences what's happening inside training. Dr. Fry gave an enjoyable talk yesterday morning talking about how all the other pieces of what they're doing in sport can be influencing and having an effect on their benefits and performance based on what we're doing as well. So taking all that into account as well as individuals in general in life. How are they doing? What's going on that may be affecting them? And then again, connecting and incorporating activities that are more like their sport to help them connect what they're doing with us in training to what they're then doing in their sport as well. And then with idealized consideration, expert strength coaches reported and were observed doing a lot of activities that fall into this type of pillar. And the first one I wanted to highlight was knowing what feedback to give their athletes, and that this is related to what we were just talking about with motivation, right? So there's some overlap between these different pillars. These are not things that you have to think of. I need to figure out how to do each one of these things separately. A lot of them are going to overlap and occur together. So there's sometimes knowing how to motivate them as individuals, but then there's also knowing what's the type of feedback that I need to be giving them as individuals, or what do they need to be working on individually to improve their performance most. In addition, it's being flexible with our training and knowing what they're needing at this point. So even though we may have had a plan, that was going to be focusing on a lot of development. We may need to adjust that based on them getting it back from their last performance late, getting minimal sleep, and we need to focus more on a recovery day than having it go into a hard training program that day. And then also just knowing our individual athletes, adjusting, making it possible for them to do training as they're having to go through their coursework or having other challenges come up within life, that we're knowing them as individuals so that we can then make those adjustments to help them continue to improve and be successful.
Awesome. So I'll take over the next couple pillars, but idolize influence. One of the most important ones or pieces that we want to highlight for you guys is that we as strength coaches directly influence our athletes. So the way that we act will hopefully rub off on them, right? And they will start to mimic things that we do. So knowing our athletes, and they're likely to do things like provide task instruction, give positive feedback, and also provide a social support system for them when they see their coaches using these behaviors. So most of you guys, this is something you didn't already know. However, we just wanted to highlight that if you're doing that, keep doing what you're doing because it is going to influence your athletes. And then next, that holding on to high expectations for our athletes. The way that to best translate to them for this is to provide feedback for these high expectations, right? If we give them a high expectation, how do they get to this and how do they do it? And then if they're not meeting that marker, how can they now readjust what they're doing to meet the expectation that we've set in front of them?
And then the last pillar is intellectual stimulation. And this is one that we typically see athletes reporting their coaches doing the least of the 4 different pillars. I think sometimes it's just this is one of those things you have to sometimes stop a little bit more and think about how you're going to incorporate it into training or be a little bit more intentional about it. But I also think that as strength coaches, we have a really nice platform to be able to do that because the type of training we're doing is, I think, easy for us to connect to them outside of training. It's not just going to be helping them in the weight room or during their agility work. It's going to help them in their sport. It's going to help them outside of their sport with their academic performance, with their overall mental health, with their well-being as well. So we're able to connect what we're doing in a lot of other ways that I think sometimes the sport coaches forget to do sometimes. So for intellectual stimulation, the big thing that expert strength and conditioning coaches report is that they really see themselves as teachers. And that role as a teacher and as a coach is very important to them. It's something they take a lot of pride in and that they put a lot of work into. So that means explaining why they're doing the exercises they're doing, how what they're doing relates to what the athletes are going to do in sport or how it's going to affect them outside of training. Right? Are you going to need to do more recovery based on what we've done in training? Or maybe we're not doing as intense a day because we're trying to help you in that recovery process. So connecting and explaining what's going on when it comes to their training, as well as connecting that training to their outside performance and sharing what they've learned with their athletes. So not unusual for me to walk into a weight room and find out that a strength coach has just decided they want to share a book or an article with one of their athletes to help them develop personally. It may not even have anything to do with sport, but just they think that this is a book that's going to help that kid with the message in it, and they want to share that information that they're learning, right? And they keep coming to other conferences and going to programs to continue learning and figure out what are other things I can do to help my athletes and keep improving my performance as well.
All right, so now we thought we'd be good to give some interaction because we're all coaches in here and we all like to talk. So what we're going to do is ask a few of you guys to share what your underpinnings are for teaching a complex movement. So not necessarily the argument of if you teach the clean, for example, from the top down or the bottom up, whatever it is. We're asking you guys to just what's your process? What do you guys do? So we have an awesome cube that NSCA has provided us, and Ashley is going to throw it to any of you guys that would like to volunteer. We'll see how many we get. Hopefully you guys all want to participate.
That means somebody has to raise their hand first.
Yeah.
There we go. So just talk into the cube.
Talk into
the cube and it'll act like a mic for you.
Just for any exercise?
Yeah, whatever complex movement you teach, yeah.
Kind of go with the squat. So I primarily work with kids now.
Oh, this is a microphone.
Yeah.
You're center stage now.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll stand up.
So one of the things that I've been learning, I'm a grad student at the University of Denver right now, and I've been so technical with my squat sequence with the kids I've been working with and some of the athletes, and I've kind of noticed that I've gotten too talkative about, be here with this and get here and try to pull this. But one of the things that I've been doing and learning that's been kind of helpful is kind of keeping them simple in terms of how to go through the movement. So everyone knows how to go take a seat, right? So one of the keys that I use now just to kind of see how they're doing it is, start with your feet about hip width apart. So you'll take a couple steps out with your feet and then have a seat in a chair. And then I automatically notice that they're able to get their hips back, follow through the movement, and then come right back up without me having to tell them to, all right, so hips back first, keep your chest up, stay nice and engaged, and blah, blah, blah. And just to kind of start with that movement, a deadlifting cue with one of my guys that I've been working with, I've incorporated that as well. A little more technical here, so working on getting the shoulders pinched back and then getting hips back, and then rather than having him go down to a lower point, going down to a point that's more comfortable for him. And I think that was one of the areas that I was really troubled with, because no one person has like a true range. Like there's no range that fits everyone. Like everyone's gonna have a different range because some people are taller than others, longer limbs and whatnot. So it's not that, there's one size that fits all. There's no, practical movement for something, but, it's working with what they have. So when I'm teaching the deadlift, same thing again. I don't like the wide grip. I'm pretty short, so my grip is not that big, so I try to keep it conventional. Same thing, hip width apart, arms spaced out, so the rings of the bar. As they go to set up, hips up a little bit, and then rather than trying to pull the bar with their arms, lifting with legs first, and then coming up all the way through.
Awesome.
Awesome, perfect, thank you. Do we have other strong, ooh, there's another brave person. You're gonna make Ashley go, run around.
Throw it. Oh, that was good. That was good. That was
Good.
good.
Testing. All right. When I'm teaching a complex movement, what I like to do is relate it back to something we've done before that's a little more simple. So if we're doing something, even if it's a squat, what have you, always want to bring it back to our belly breathing that we've done earlier in the day, in our warm-up and our prep. Say, take that deep breath in through your nose, exhale, we brace. Okay. And then maybe some external cues. So if we're still talking about the squat, we're pulling the bar into our upper back, we're splitting the ground, and we hinge. And we've always done the hinge. That's one of the first movements I'm going to teach my athletes when they come in. So maybe before I get to that complex movement, I've planned it out a couple weeks before where I say, okay, we're going to take a look at this movement, this movement, this movement in order to progress appropriately. If I see an athlete struggling, I already know, hopefully have an idea of what cues they respond to by those couple weeks prior. And then always want to give them feedback at the end of the session, bring them in, say, this is what was done well, this is what we'll continue to work on. And sometimes you'll see them get frustrated. I know that, especially when you're working with some higher level athletes, they look at you and they seem discouraged because they're like, I didn't get it at first. And you have to remind them, like, when you started to walk, you fell down a number of times. Like, let's take it little by little and continue to work and, keep on that thing, because they'll respond to hard work. They want to work hard and they want to get it right. So you got to play to what they know and what's going to challenge them to keep going and keep progressing. And, when we're talking about complex movements too, I like to remind them that's also going to expose some weaknesses, so it shows me where I can help and plug in some other things that will make them better at those movements. So just kind of giving them little by little, but always relating it back to what they've done previously.
Awesome.
Great, and I see, are you willing to give it a throw? Do it. There we go.
Yeah, so a couple things that we've used, obviously, physically we're principle of progression, so we want to be progressing into more complex movements, but when it comes to leadership behaviors, number one is always believe in a proactive approach to coaching. So we want to anticipate what we're going to need our athletes to do and then proactively put tools in place to use. So an expectation for us in the weight room would be mutual respect. So if I'm talking, you're listening. If you're talking, I'm listening. And so like teaching reciprocation through that. So we know that we're going to be teaching complex movements that we need athletes' attention. And so early on, they know when they walk into the weight room, there's an expectation that when we're talking, you're listening. And when you're talking, we're listening. And so may repeat that, especially when we know we need a lot of attention on a complex movement. Second thing would be then is like after we model it and go through cues, is then, we're teaching active listening. So anybody that also coaches a sport, you're in the middle of a timeout, what do you need your players to do? Be actively listening. And so in the weight room, we can teach them active listening by now repeat back to me the primary cues. And so we'll go through the movement, model it, repeat back to me the primary cues, or we'll choose a peer or an informal leader to model it for the other students that just watched it being done. Other two things that we might do from a leadership standpoint is, another tool is we use the term wingman, wingwoman. And so when they're training alongside one another, it's not just a training partner, you're not just spotting, but we're defining what that relationship should look like from an encouragement standpoint, accountability, et cetera. So if I'm your wingman, I'm not just spotting you, I'm responsible to be repeating the cues that my coach just gave us on that complex movement. And then the final thing at the end would be from a celebration standpoint is we might do a post-workout reflection where they're looking at other people on the team or around the weight room and saying like, this is something positive that I saw you do. And so now we're getting a positive affirmation through it. So just different leadership principles.
Awesome.
Great. And do we have anybody from this side? We got everybody over there. Nobody over here wants to talk to us? There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
And then back there.
I think the biggest thing would just be keep it simple. Like start with one cue or two cues maybe, because I feel like people mentioned this already where they just go way too technical and try to give the athletes too many things to focus on all at once, and then the athlete gets overwhelmed, and when they're already trying to learn something complex, it just is too much. So pick one or two things that you think are most important and then stick with those until they start getting that right and be a little bit more consistent with that. And then you start adding more things on top of that. So as long as you keep it simple and break it down and break it into pieces, I think that's kind of the best way to kind of teach a complicated movement.
Great. And we had one other person in the back.
Oh, that was good. Yeah.
We look at what type of learners I'm dealing with, so whether they be auditory, visual, or a kinesthetic type learner. So we try to break it down. I love Leo Totten when he does the USAW Olympic lifting certification. With the complex movement, you want to tell them what it is, show them how to do it. You want to allow them to, we want to break it down to 3 key points. Keep it simple, allow them to try it, and then after they try it with those 3 points, then you want to try to give some correction and some tips. Then you just repeat. And then sometimes you go through that process, allows all your learners to see it in different ways, in different spaces, and connect with it in different ways. So it works for us.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you. So we appreciate all of you guys. Oh, were you about to share something? I couldn't see you
Just
back there.
gonna dovetail off of that point too, is being excited about those small victories, or if it's an RDL, being really excited about that. Or I spend a lot of time with people that are difficult to tell no to. So I get excited about clean pulls. Not power cleans or not power snatches, but clean pulls. And if you do that, I'm fired up about it. So that's another way that again dovetails off your point about positive reinforcement. Breaking down at the end of the session, I thought I was all pretty awesome and keeping it simple. So passionate about those small improvements.
And so I appreciate all of you guys sharing, because what you guys have been saying to us are the things that, one, we were hoping you were going to say. So good job without having any plants. You guys gave us great stuff about building up progressions, right? That we keep things simple. We'll work on 1 or 2 things. We master that before we move on to the next. We're giving them positive reinforcement on what they're doing. We're also figuring out who they are, is what's feasible, right? You may not have the most range of motion to start with for your deadlift, so we're not going to go through the full range of motion. We're going to do what's safe and feasible for you, and we're going to build from there, right? And so the idea with including leadership is some of the skills we're building is we want to do that as well. We want to be intentional about it. And what we've seen is that we have to intentionally and specifically try to build these leadership behaviors among our athletes. Unfortunately, us role modeling it helps and increases the likelihood that they're going to be doing those same behaviors. But if we actually give them some instruction and we do a progression, just like we were talking about with our exercises, we're going to see that come out more in our athletes. And so what we have coming up next are some different leadership development strategies, and we've broken them down into things that we can do as coaches on a daily basis that we're implementing all the time, getting all of our athletes regular practice at being a leader, and then some rotating leadership roles that are not taking on those formal leadership roles, but they're just mini experiences of taking on a little bit more leadership in front of the group so that they can build the ability to be those leaders in front of the whole group in the future, potentially, as a formal leader. So we broke these down to align with the 4 pillars of transformational leadership, and we're going to highlight a few of these right now. This afternoon session, we're going to go through these in more detail. We're going to demonstrate some of them, and we're also going to work on developing additional strategies. We want to highlight these for you guys while we have you all here now. So first, with individualized consideration, and some of you had mentioned this, was having the athletes give their partners feedback. And so we give a lot of feedback, right? We're usually very good at giving feedback. The trick is helping to make sure that we can maximize our athletes getting as much feedback as possible. Val was talking about we want our athletes to be getting 5 positive reinforcements to every 1 negative from us. And if we can increase that so that they're getting even more positive feedback overall by their teammates also giving them instructional and positive feedback, they're going to improve even more, right? Because we can't be everywhere at once. But part of that is also making sure they know that's their role and responsibility. Right, so teaching them the vocabulary to actually do that. It amazes me, especially with inspirational motivation, giving praise, how often they just don't seem to have the vocabulary to give their peers positive feedback or praise. So we have to teach them what are some appropriate and respectful ways to give instructional feedback, and what are things you can say to get your teammates pumped up about what they just did or encourage them to do better, so that they actually are implementing those behaviors. And then with idealized influence, we talked about a little bit, some of the folks role modeling, having other athletes role model what's being done. And one of the things we want to really help make sure we're doing also is having a wide variety of our athletes role modeling. Sometimes it's easy to select the same athlete to role model multiple different skills, but every athlete has a strength. So if we're able to have different athletes role modeling different skills, we're maximizing the athletes who are highlighting what they're best at and feeling most confident in. And then intellectual stimulation on a daily basis is that educational piece that you guys were talking about, that scaffolding of connecting it to what they've done before, connecting to what they're going to be doing in their sport, and helping them understand the progression, right? If we're in a strength phase, then we may see your power go up some, but we're going to look to see that go up more when we get into our power phase. So I'm not stressing out if I'm not seeing big changes in your power right now. Or we got you faster and your agility time went down because now we're going to build up your ability to handle that increased speed. Okay, so having them understand the relationships between what we're doing in our training programs.
Perfect. And now I'm just going to take the time to go over some of those rotational things that we can do. So maybe something that you're not doing every day, but you're allowing the athletes to rotate into those positions either on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly basis, however you see fit within your program. So starting with individualized consideration. Again, we're not reinventing the wheel here. Most of you guys may be doing this stuff, but it's just being intentional about what you're doing. Having an athlete lead a section of the warm-up, or having an athlete who maybe was like your senior, lead the first week, and then followed by a junior, freshman, so on and so forth. But just making sure that you highlight the informal portion of that is what's really important, because sometimes we forget and we just have the same people demo these things. We also need to just be aware that they may mess up a little bit, and that's okay, because when we all first started coaching, right, we weren't perfect at it, and if they forget to do something, you just teach them that, hey, make sure you add these things in, or you're talking to your athletes or using a louder voice. Inspirational motivation, and we've heard of a couple people say that they do this, having a session reflection. So picking one or multiple athletes to talk about how they felt that session went. We as coaches do a really good job of like, all right guys, I want to see high energy. I want these things done today. We did a really good job of this. And then you provide that feedback of whether or not you felt that that training session went a certain way. But it's just important for us to get the athlete's perspective of that, right? How do you think you did? How do you think your teammates at your rack did that day, right? Do you felt like we did have high energy? How are you feeling about this training session? So that is an important thing that we just have to remember as coaches, is just as valuable as us providing that feedback to them. And then idolize influence, so having an individual demonstrate some of these exercises. We're going to go over a few of these later today, but again, most important part here is that we are rotating this role, so it's not just the same person doing it. Maybe you have somebody over the course of a season working on how to pull a bar up from the ground, and they're doing a really good job of it now because it's towards the end, and maybe you have them demo that exercise in front of everybody, and that also gives them that reaffirmation that they're doing things correctly, right? Like they've been working really hard, and they need to continue to do that for you. And then last but not least, intellectual stimulation. So we, again, are either translating that onto on-field performance, giving them an idea of why we're doing what we're doing. This can be highlighted in a number of different areas, but I think like specifically when it comes to me coaching, it's really nice when I can like tell an athlete what to do and they tell me exactly what it is that they're going to do afterwards, and how that applies to them not only personally, but also as far as sports performance goes.
And then they're able to help each other with cues and be able to understand and explain why they're doing the exercise, or get their teammate motivated to do the exercise because, hey, I used to be the slowest kid on the team. I could never catch anybody. I've been doing this crazy bounding thing, and now I can catch people, right? So they're being able to use their stories to help motivate their peers because they hear us say the same thing over and over again, and even if their peer uses the same words, it somehow suddenly makes sense when their peer says it in a different octave, I guess, or they use some different words that are much more cool than anything I could ever say, and that gets them engaged in understanding why it's important. So we also wanted to highlight, in case you didn't see in April, there was a special issue of the Strength and Conditioning Journal that had a focus on different aspects of psychology with strength and conditioning. So there's a number of articles that are in that issue if you're interested in leadership or in any other aspect when it comes to psychology. There's about 6 different articles that made up that issue that had psychology emphasis. Ours was one of them that goes into some of these things in more detail if you're not able to come this afternoon. But this afternoon we're going to go into a lot more specifics on the implementation components and strategies to get the intentional leadership development with our athletes. And so we wanted to make sure that we had left a couple of minutes to ask or answer any questions that people may have. So we appreciate you guys coming this morning and wanted to open it up for questions and getting to receive that fun block.
So what works for you to help to make a positive feedback culture? So sometimes you can get feedback from a teammate or say maybe from another assistant coach, but making sure that that feedback is positive and that people can be receptive of it. Sometimes people aren't receptive of that feedback and they feel like it's negative or it's like a slight against them. How can you create a culture where that's positive and everybody's getting feedback from everyone?
So part of it is one, talking with your athletes to give them some of those cues as to things that they can use for positive feedback. So it can be things like good job and high effort, giving people a high five. Some high school coaches I know set up so that they have a bell that gets rung every time somebody has a PR, and then everybody in the weight room stops and gives cheers for that person, no matter what level of a PR it was. So part of it's setting up that structure, and then also talking with the athletes to find out, like, I thought I was giving positive feedback to an athlete by telling her she was getting better, but to her that meant she wasn't doing well enough yet. And so needing to find out from their peers and us talking to the athletes as well, what are the terms or the phrases that do help motivate them, right? Because sometimes even something that would maybe motivate the person next to them is not a phrase that connects for them for whatever reason. But we want to work on getting both the verbal and the nonverbal cues developed among our athletes.
So the situation I'm in, a lot of my kids with the best attitudes, hardest workers, stuff like that, are also the most introverted kids on the team. They do everything they're supposed to, they model well, but they're not necessarily very good at teaching other folks or reaching out to them to bring them up. Do you have any strategies for helping the introverted people become better leaders if they already have good attitudes?
Awesome. So like one thing, a lot of times introverted leaders do a little bit better, or just even starting off if they're not comfortable as leaders, starting off in smaller groups. So it may be one-on-one or a small training group that you put them into, where they're the one who's helping with teaching what the exercise looks like, being the role model for the work ethic, helping with the progression. So when I would have athletes and break them into small groups with their training partners, I would oftentimes match them with one more experienced than one less experienced, so that the more experienced one, if I came over and recognized that this athlete had met their form and their reps, that they were ready to move to the next piece, the more experienced athlete was still there when I had to go help the next group, make sure that the less experienced athlete was doing the proper form and in that new exercise that they were learning, right? So they don't have to necessarily be in front of the whole group to be able to still have that impact, but also reinforcing for them, hey, this is my expectation for you, and as their partner, I've given them this role to help you. So you want to learn from them because they're very successful at this. So it's helping empower both of them to know they're doing this because I asked them to, because they're very good, and for you to listen to what they're giving you as feedback.
Yeah, I think the key to that is just keeping it small, like really small at first. So when I had a couple kids who were super introverted, and we were outside on the football field, and I had like 40 kids, and I couldn't be with all of them at once. So I had one kid demo, and then everybody else had to provide feedback that I had given them. Okay, here's the things that we're looking for. And before you know it, the kids that were a little bit more introverted were talking more on the team, and they found new friends that they thought that they didn't have before. Takes some time, but I think that if you just, start small and then gradually work them up, hopefully you'll start to see some changes.
And being able to give them those small pieces where they get to practice, because sometimes it's just being comfortable being in front of them, being in front of more than one person and talking. And so some of our rotating roles are things that, they can be leading part of a warm-up. It may only be 3 of the exercises in the warm-up, but they're getting to have that practice of being the one in front of the group and telling them what's expected for the exercise, how to do the technique, or helping lead that reflection at the end, that they're the one in front of the group doing that, and that builds up their comfort level as a leader. I've also been surprised just in asking for one of my athletes to demo an exercise and not specifying. I'm sometimes shocked at the people who raise their hand and are confident enough to demonstrate a particular exercise that might not have been the person I would have initially selected, but I'm excited that they have that confidence, and I want to reinforce that, so I'm going to ask them to be the one to do it.
Anyone else?
He keeps raising his hand.
Oh, he's real. He's okay.
He's real.
He's like, please, over here,
He's
look
actually
at me.
there.
Thank you very much. What are your thoughts on certain kind of leadership directives or modeling on things that might have unintended consequences, like promoting the idea that hard work is going to include pain, or you got to work through pain, when maybe that's not precisely the message you want to teach to athletes, that you're going to have to deal with that.
Go ahead.
So I think a lot of that connects back to the education piece and educating our athletes on understanding and what's the difference between being sore, between having an exercise be difficult, and what is a negative level of pain and experience, that this is a warning sign. This isn't I'm pushing myself to be able to do 1 more or 2 more repetitions. This is putting me at risk for an injury. And so helping our athletes understand that, and being able to understand when they've done hard workouts that they need that recovery to be able to then perform again as well, right? And that's part of also helping them learn to understand themselves and know how their body responds to training, and recognizing and listening to their body, because the only person who's getting those pain messages is actually them. We're just going to go off of what they're telling us when it comes to that information.
Awesome. Well, thanks, you guys. Hopefully all of you will be able to come to our Bridge the Gap session later today. I think it's at 1 o'clock, exhibit hall 1. A. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.